This is how people imagine that I talk when I say I'm French. But actually, this is not what they get. And it's very confusing for them. They're like, you're from that island, and is their island like speaking English? And I'm like, no, it's a French island. Don't get me wrong. Like, I did everybody else. I've learned it at school, but I also did something else, which I don't think a lot of people do when they're learning a language. And I think this is one of the key reasons why when I've learned English, but also other languages, I managed to kind of smooth in a little bit the accent part. I'm not saying you don't hear my accent, like you will hear it. Certain words, like especially if they're borrowed from French, you will definitely hear me. I just don't know what to say, or I'll be like, is it data? Depending, I will switch between different accents as well. That's fine. But there is a methodology, there is a way that you can improve your accent if that's something you want to work on. Obviously, you don't need to work on your accent if this is not what you want. Why do I pay a lot of attention to the accent? Because I always think if you speak a little bit of a broken language, but then you do it in a way that sounds natural, people are more willing to talk to you in this language because they don't have this barrier of entry regarding the sound. They are just like, oh, the sound is familiar, like I just don't understand what that person is saying. But it's the same like if you're talking to someone, they're like a little bit messy in their like thought process, you would have the same in your native language. So it is much more accessible for the native speaker of the target language to speak to you. So this is why for me I think it's important, and I've tried to do it in other languages as well, semi-successfully. But although it's might not be the most favorite topic for everybody, I know some people really gonna hate that video, and if that's, you don't need to watch, you don't need to change your accent. This is just a tool that you have in a toolbox, and it's a skill that you can grow, but it's not something that is gonna make you a good language learner or a good speaker. It really depends on the person, right? Some people, for example, they will be excellent in writing in their target language. Some people, they'll be excellent in speaking. Depend on your goals. If your goal is really to communicate with people in a flawless, natural way, I like to say that in Korean all the time, I want to talk. This is the reason why I'm learning a language, because I want to talk the language. It's like, I don't want to draft in that language, like contract. I'm saying that because I work in the legal field. My objective would not be that. Like in English, of course it is, because that's my work as well. I work in English. But in other languages, in Spanish, like I was in Argentina for like almost a month, and I was speaking Spanish with people, and my goal was to get to the point, to have the conversation. I even ended up talking about a volcano, like, because in my island we have a volcano, and I met a volcano, and we ended up talking about volcano in the middle of watching a glacier in Patagonia, in Efate in Patagonia, in Spanish. Can you imagine? Wow. Those are thanks to my language skills, and it is not because I speak perfectly Spanish or with an accent. You heard me. I have an accent in Spanish, and you can hear it. But really gave me the confidence. Okay, at least I sound something that is close to what a learner that, have learned for a long time might have. So now that we have that out of the way, and that if you're the type of person that you're like, yes, I want to improve my accent. Yes, how do I do it? First of all, when you're learning a language, you have to get familiar with the sound of the language. I've never really done the thing where you go through the alphabet and you're like a, I, U, E, O, like when you go through the language and then you start like pronouncing the name. I think this is very important for Chinese, for example, Chinese Mandarin, with the tone. But in a lot of language, this is not something that you think of doing, and if you're learning on your own, you're just gonna get lazy. You're not gonna do it. What instead I recommend is that first you need to be able, and this is like basic foundation, right? But be careful, don't laugh at me. It might not be always, right? Let's say before I moved to the Netherlands, I might not have been so good at distinguishing German from Dutch, right? Because those languages were maybe something that I was not familiar with. Or maybe if you're learning like a Nordic language, you might not be able at the beginning to distinguish them. So first step is to really be able to spot the language. like from the first 2-3 words, like you should be able to spot it. That can be difficult sometimes if you're learning, for example, like in certain language, you have words that are similar. If you take Russian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian, Macedonian, you will have certain words they are similar. So you need to know a little bit about the language. But that's when you start to know, okay, I hear it, I identify the word, because there's a difference between reading the word, when I read it, like I know which language it is, and then hearing it. That's different, right? Because it is clear. For example, kabang, it's the same word in 2 language. Or library. And for example, you have certain words like doshokan. It's also doshokan in Korean and in Japanese, and I believe in Chinese. Korean, you also say that. Let me double check. Oh, listen. Okay, it's different. We know, but it's the same root. It's the same word in a way. So this example is perfect because if you hear one word alone, depending on the context, you might not be able to recognize it because it exists in multiple languages. It might be the same for Spanish and Portuguese, right? Language that are close to each other. The first step really is to be able to identify like right away. And if you've learned Japanese, Korean, or Mandarin, you would recognize which one is the language that you're learning because the accent is different. If you read it as well, pretty simple, like Korean straight away. Japanese, you know, because of the structure, and a Mandarin Chinese, unless it's, I don't know, I know when it's not Japanese. That's what I can tell you. So the first step is really to be able to identify your language instantly. Poof, you hear it, bam. That's step 1. Step 2, when you listen to things, and that's like the step really that is gonna help you through the whole process. When you go through the process and you're listening, start to try to identify what is the standard accent. Why I'm saying that? Obviously, if you're speaking like Spanish, if you're learning Spanish, that's like a lot of accent. You have like standard Spanish from Spain, and then you have Latin America Spanish, and then within that you have so many one. And within one country you have also different accent, right? I'm talking about, my god, if you're learning Mandarin, good luck, because there's a lot of language and there's a lot of dialect, and that's even more difficult. Let's just take Spanish for example. You have Spanish, and then you have the standard Spanish maybe speaking in big cities, and then you have maybe Valencia. In Valencia, you have Valencia, I think it's there, in Valencia. You have another accent, right? It's the same in Korean. If you hear Korean, you have the Seoul accent, and you have maybe like the Busan. So it's important to identify different accent. I usually recommend to go for a neutral accent unless you have a specific reason to adopt a specific accent. If your goal is to study in Argentina or work in Argentina, it might be helpful to learn the accent of the Sheyama instead of Miyama, or Mishama instead of, for example, if you want to work in Argentina, it might be best to adopt the pronunciation instead of the yi, right? It is better if you're gonna work there. But if it's not the case, if you don't want to live in this country or whatever, I would recommend picking a neutral one. And for example, for me, I don't really the Spanish accent from Spain. I prefer from Colombia or Mexico. So I usually tend to listen to things that are in that accent. So that's why it's important to pick which accent you're gonna follow, because from that you identified it, you know how to identify the language, you know which accent you want to mimic in a way or you want to sound like. Now you can start into the really input method. So if you've done Rayfold method, you know what I'm talking about, is that basically you're gonna expose yourself to the language so much that you're gonna be so familiar with the sound. And this is why it's important to do this first selection, because if you start listening to a language that is not the language that you're studying, it doesn't make sense. But you can also start with the language that you're studying but it's not the right accent. That can be difficult. Things to know is that input, you can do passive and active input. Passive is that you put it in the background, you just hear it. That just helps with the musicality of the language. Each language has their own musicality, I believe that, at least from the language that I've learned. So it's great to have a really good impression of what's the musicality of the language. The second thing is the active one. The active is that you're gonna sit there and you're gonna really listen what they're talking about. I recommend starting input active input as soon as possible. I am 100% for immersion. And I think maybe one time I should do like a mini immersion. Like, it's a girl on Instagram, she started this mini immersion that I really love, is that you have a weekend where you immerse yourself in a language. And I love that completely. And I think I should definitely do that. It's on my list of to do. But yeah, this aside, is that when you focus heavily on input, you're gonna hear two things. Accent, this is what we're working on, like how people pronounce word, because sometimes you'll see something like Dokkan, there is different way to pronounce it when you think about it, right? There's Japanese, the Chinese, the Korean way, although there's like todo. At the end of the day, similar words, but then you, by hearing it over and over in different contexts, you will know how to say it. But you will also know how to say word like differently depending on intonation. Are you happy? Are you mad? Are you a man? Are you a woman? That might not be relevant for some language, but that is very relevant in other languages. Depending also, yeah, if it's older person talk, like the pace might be different. If like the cultural background might be different as well. By listening as much as you can, by having as much as you can of input, you will be able to start naturally know how to pronounce a word properly. That's the very, even more when language and tone, when tone play an important part of the language comprehension. But even when it does not, I know, for example, I was saying something in Korean and the teacher had understanding what I was saying because of a word that was sounding very similar to another one. And it might be, it was something small, I can't even remember right now. But yeah, that word was really like a point of, oh, she was not understanding what I was saying. And then when I explained, she understood and she repeated the word that I was like, oh, I hear the difference. I didn't realize I was not saying the difference. So the first steps in this like input session, it's not even a session, it's like it's a path. It's like a whole year, 2 years, 3 years. Like the input, you should always do it because it's gonna help you also build up natural expression because you're gonna see them in context. And I've done maybe like long time ago a video on that, I think so, on read method and like the benefit of immersion. But really, when you immerse yourself, you get to know like how people react, or like some of the joke. I remember like I've learned, which means, oh, I like it, from context. And I later learned actually this is used only when you first see something and you like it, but I never realized it. But it's, oh, like I start using it. Or 재미없어 is always not funny, but it also means other things. It just doesn't not only mean it's not funny, it's, oh, what you're doing is it can mean different things depending on the context. And those things you will learn only if you do input. And if you do input, you can start the second part of that journey. And the second part is to shadow. Yes, you might sound weird, you might sound like, you might sound stupid, but bear with me. Because when you do the shadowing part, you can do many things. You can use songs, although songs sometimes they change a little bit, the pronunciation is not great, but try it still regardless. It's fun, it's nice to do. Try to shadow expression. By repeating over and over, you start to hear it different ways. You start to be like, I feel confident with it. There is something that I always struggle is I'd like to try. Anyway, I can't remember right now. But yeah, so there is that it might be very difficult to pronounce. I know, for example, those sound are not sound that I'm used to. And in order to be able to pronounce it, I need to hear it multiple times. Like, I need to hear it. So if I hear it in context and I hear people of different age, coming from different place saying it, then slowly get into my brain, and sometimes I can repeat the expression, just, oh yeah, this is how you say it, oh yeah, this is how you pronounce it. So that's really help. If you do that regularly, you're gonna already start to build something. And obviously the second part is that I recommend faking it a little bit. Faking it in the sense of, okay, you might not feel like 100% confident. Let's say you're learning Spanish and then you're like, okay, there are to be like this, right? I mean, no, I'm not gonna do that. So let's say you're doing Spanish and then you have to say something that you have to roll in, accentuated, like just do it extra. No, it's okay if it doesn't sound natural yet. It might sound eventually, right? Always try to make it as natural as you can. But if it doesn't sound natural, bring it still. So I recommend recording yourself reading something. Let me just give an example. You can be like, you want text language, like I'll just put Korean. That's a good example. Actually, to do that, Korean podcast, Brother Yoon. I love that podcast. It's amazing. He has an amazing page. So the other thing that I like to do, so when I do the immersion, is that you take a podcast. I'll give an example of Brother Yoon. And in his website, what he has, it's amazing. He has the podcast, amazing. He has the podcast, a script. So the transcript of everything and the sound. So for example, he has now, I didn't pick it, it's the last, is racism in South Korea. Actually, I don't even know how to say racism. But let me try to read it. 한국의 인종주의, 한국은 인종차별이 없는 나라인가? Okay, so what I recommend you to do is that you can read through the things, but you can also usually put it somewhere. The podcast, you can follow the link. It doesn't have it. So what you would have is that you would have the podcast, and then what you can do is that you can listen to the podcast, and by listening to the podcast, you will hear basically what he's saying. I'll give an example. So you listen to it, and then you repeat. 시간이 빠르다고 고인. So by doing that exercise, you hear it, then repeat it. You hear it, then repeat it. Then you can build up like the sound. I like to repeat what girl says, so I usually use Didi because I like just the way that she sounds, her pronunciation. I really like it. Then you can hear it. You don't have to repeat everything. I wanted to show something is that she had the transcript, and that is sometimes automatically generated. But what you can do is that you can really type and then repeat a little bit what they say. Don't underestimate the power of shadowing and the power of repeating, because those are things that's gonna help you in the long run. So the moment I start doing input is from the start, but use input in two different ways. Use input for actually trying to learn the language in terms of language in context, and sometimes use input as the accent part. And I really recommend you to listen to natural as much as possible. So ideally, watch content in the language, whether it's like TV shows. Reality shows are so fun because people, although they might follow a script, they're not reading through the script. So they're like saying things that is not grammatically correct, but they just say it the natural way. So those are really things that's going to help you really build up that. Another thing is that try to find what is your natural tone. You realize in the language you can have, it's the same. I can talk like that, like very high, or I can talk very like low. That's like my language, right? And sometimes you actually have different tone, but you get to know the tone that you have. It's important to pick also speakers that you listen to regularly that have the tone that you match the best. Didi, for example, she has a quite high tone pitch, so I'm not always mimicking her. I mimic other people, but I like just the way she pronounces words, so I will use that as a pronunciation guide. So the input help as pronunciation, as understanding, but also as like how do you play with the language. There is a difference between saying like where you emphasize, right? This is very important in Japanese as well. I like to do that actually. Anyway, so for me, this is something that has really helped me over the years to have this setup. I have this kind of things that was part of my language learning journey. I don't consider it as just part of a daily habit. It's actually I regularly do it. Like I regularly listen to something and then repeat naturally, or just I like this sentence, what does it mean, let me repeat it, so it can be part of my vocab or it can be part of the expression that I know. So those are really small examples that I hope is gonna help you boost that thing. And if you speak with an accent, that's fine. We all do. We all have an accent. Even it's a neutral accent, it's an accent. And that's part of who you are. And if you want to improve it, you can use those steps. If you don't want, that's fine. I'm glad you watched the video anyway. And yeah, I hope you're gonna find this helpful. And if you do something else, please let me know. It's always important, of course, to work with a native as well, and to work with people that have studied the language. I think it exists like certain like accent coach, but I don't think it's so important if you just want to improve in the language. I think that is important later when you're like more fluent, and then you're like, okay, this time I really want to improve on this and this, and then you can fine tune. But don't get stuck on that. I think this is just like a small guide on what it can help you. So on that, I'll see you next time. Bye.